The reunion meant to mend a shattered royal bloodline didn't merely unravel. It was dismantled with chilling precision at the very last moment. And the question everyone keeps asking refuses to disappear. Was this really about security? Or had it always been about control? The entire world waited for one unforgettable photograph. A single image of a grandfather finally embracing his grandchildren. A healing moment for a fractured dynasty. Everything was prepared, flights were booked, and the global media held its breath for the long-awaited homecoming. Then, at the final moment, the curtain crashed down and everything went dark. The reunion was cancelled. Archie and Lilibet remained in California. The public explanation blamed inadequate police protection. But look closer at those cancelled flights, and another story begins to emerge. It was never truly about danger. It was about leverage. Just like that, what seemed like a heartfelt family reunion transformed into something colder, something carefully calculated. Because when flights are arranged, staff are prepared, expectations quietly rise within palace walls, and everything is cancelled at the 11th hour, you are no longer witnessing a misunderstanding. You are witnessing a message, deafening despite its silence. Think about it. The world stood ready for reconciliation. Cameras waited, headlines were practically written. A grandfather growing older, facing deeply personal battles, hoping for a moment that suddenly felt heartbreakingly impossible. Then absolutely nothing. No arrival, no children, no closure, only an explanation that never quite added up. Security became the shield, the excuse, the official narrative. But the deeper you dig, the more that explanation begins falling apart. Here is the contradiction nobody can ignore. How does a family living inside one of California's most secure private estates suddenly become too vulnerable to visit one of the world's most heavily monitored cities? The logic does not simply bend. It completely shatters. Insiders noticed quietly at first. Then much louder. Questions began piling up like dominoes. Why now? Why cancel everything so late? Why tie the presence of two children to something as complicated and as public as a legal showdown over state security? Because once those dots connect, the picture becomes deeply uncomfortable. This was never simply about skipping a visit. It was about applying pressure. Watch the timing. The legal battle over protection was already heating up. The stakes kept climbing behind closed courtroom doors. Then suddenly the most emotionally powerful part of the entire story, children, grandchildren, family, was placed directly at the center. Not by accident. Deliberately, it changed everything because now it was no longer only a legal dispute. It became emotional leverage, a narrative crafted to attract sympathy, reshape public opinion, and build such a powerful sense of injustice that it overshadowed the legal reality underneath. Yet somehow, something failed to unfold as expected. Instead of overwhelming sympathy, there was hesitation, skepticism, and a growing feeling that this last-minute cancellation looked less like protection and more like strategy, like a chess move performed in front of the entire world where every piece was positioned for maximum effect. Even the language reportedly used behind closed doors hinted exactly that. The suggestion that access to the children, the family, and that long-awaited reunion somehow depended upon something else, something transactional, something conditional. That is where everything changes because when family reunions begin resembling negotiations, the story stops feeling simple. It becomes layered, messy, and almost painful to witness. Meanwhile, the palace remained silent, neither reactive nor defensive, simply still. That silence was never empty. It was strategic in its own right. While one side pushed its narrative into public view through statements, legal filings, and carefully timed disclosures, the other side embraced something even more unsettling. They refused to engage, raising an even bigger question. What happens when one side keeps shouting while the other declines to respond? The answer is never obvious. It rarely is. But the consequences spread because now the narrative splinters. Supporters divide. Critics grow sharper. and the truth becomes increasingly difficult to separate from the surrounding noise. Was this a father protecting his children from genuine danger? Or was it a calculated escalation in a much larger fight over status, recognition, and influence? Because here is the uncomfortable reality. Nobody wants to admit it aloud when you walk away from the institution. You do not just surrender responsibility, you also surrender privilege. Trying to reclaim one without accepting the loss of the other is exactly where everything begins colliding. And collide it certainly did. Behind the emotional headlines, a much colder reality kept unfolding. Legal frameworks, government policies, and rigid structured rules that refuse bending for sentiment. Suddenly, what appeared to be a personal dispute exposed something far greater. A collision between identity and institution. A man seeking the freedom of independence without accepting the cost of losing everything attached to it. A system refusing partial departures. You are either inside or outside. Right now, that dividing line has never seemed sharper. As the dust settles over this abandoned homecoming, one truth hangs heavier than everything else. This was never the ending. It was the beginning of something far more dangerous. A battle no longer limited to private conversations or quiet disagreements, but one now unfolding publicly, inside courtrooms, and within the shadows where decisions happen without ever being fully explained. And if this was only the opening move, then what comes next could be something absolutely nobody is ready to witness. Just when the entire saga seemed to reach its breaking point, the real battlefield quietly shifted away from cancelled flights and emotional headlines, landing squarely inside the cold, unforgiving machinery of power, law, and something even more dangerous, perception. That is where this story stops being about a missed reunion and starts becoming something far more unsettling: the courtroom. The place where emotion carries no weight. Narratives are stripped away, leaving everything reduced to status, precedent, and ruthless legal clarity. Suddenly, what had been presented as a desperate appeal for safety begins looking like something entirely different. A demand not whispered, not concealed, but placed directly before the system itself. And the system never blinked. Because beneath every emotional argument sits one unshakable reality: state protection is not a personal convenience. It is not something you walk away from and later reclaim whenever it becomes useful. It is tied to duty, role, and responsibility. Once that connection is severed, the unraveling becomes permanent. But here comes the twist, making everything appear even more calculated. This was never solely about protection. It was about what protection symbolizes: power, visibility, authority. Private security may keep someone safe, but it cannot make the world pause. It cannot clear street. It cannot command instant attention. It simply does not send the same signal. In a world where image means everything, that distinction becomes explosive. So the question shifts again. Not whether they are safe, but what exactly they are trying to preserve. Because when someone with access to millions, living inside a fortified estate surrounded by elite protection, still insists upon state-level security, it raises a much deeper, more uncomfortable question. What is truly missing? The answer keeps circling back to one word: status. The deeper this story goes, the more contradictions begin piling up like evidence impossible to ignore. Massive deals, worldwide platforms, carefully polished narratives celebrating independence, freedom, and walking away from the institution. Yet simultaneously, an unrelenting campaign to reclaim one of the most visible privileges attached to that very institution. You cannot leave the crown behind while expecting the crown to keep following you. That has always been the rule. History wrote that script long before this chapter ever existed. History does not rewrite itself for anyone, not even those born into it. That explains why the resistance is not emotional. It is structural. That is exactly what makes this clash so dangerous. One side is playing with emotion, narrative, and public perception, while the other operates inside a system refusing to react to pressure the way many expect. It absorbs everything before moving forward completely unchanged. That is the real surprise. Not the refusal, not the silence, but the realization that nothing, no interview, no legal challenge, no emotional leverage appears capable of producing the expected outcome. Instead, something entirely different is unfolding. Isolation, not loud, not theatrical, simply gradual. Every move intended to create pressure instead creates greater distance. Every effort to reshape the narrative encounters something even more unsettling than resistance, indifference. That is where the entire strategy begins falling apart, because leverage only succeeds when the other side actually feels it. But what if they never do? What if the system being challenged was never designed to respond to that kind of pressure? That silent realization keeps creeping across this entire situation. The deeply uncomfortable possibility that this game is being played against something refusing to play along. Then comes the most painful layer of all, the human one, time. While strategies unfold, legal battles continue stretching, and narratives are endlessly built then rebuilt, time never pauses. It keeps moving quietly, relentlessly, carrying away opportunities that never return, moments that can never be rescheduled. Conversations that never take place, connections that disappear before they are ever truly formed. Suddenly, the entire situation feels even heavier. Because what is being negotiated is not merely security, status, or recognition. It is time that can never be replaced. Yet every position remains frozen, unmoved, uncompromising. Which brings us to the question now hanging over everything like a shadow refusing to disappear. If this strategy is failing, if the pressure is not landing, if the system refuses to bend, then why keep pushing? Because that points toward something even bigger hiding beneath the surface, something beyond security, beyond status, beyond even the carefully crafted public narrative. A long game, a strategy that has not completely revealed itself yet. That is where the tension refuses to disappear. It only grows deeper. Because the more this story unfolds, the more it feels like everything witnessed so far is only part of the picture. Not even remotely close. And if that is true, then the real question is not what just happened. It is what happens next, and whether anyone is truly prepared for it.